Which katana in Elden Ring is truly the best? To answer that question, I completed the game and its entire DLC a total of 10 times, each run with a different katana, polishing every build to its finest version while mastering the strengths and weaknesses of each individual blade. In this video, we are diving into a ranked list where I'll show you the best possible build for every katana, and finally discover which one takes the crown. Just as a side note, I didn't skip optional bosses like Malenia in the base game or Veil in the DLC. I tested every katana in every possible scenario to get the clearest picture of their true capabilities and limitations. If you want me to do the same for other weapon classes, be sure to drop a like and subscribe so you don't miss any new videos. As the number 10, we have the Starline Sword. This weapon is one of the coolest and most visually appealing katanas in the entire game. Sadly, it comes with multiple downsides that make it one of the less effective, if not the worst options for this class. It's so short that sometimes I had to get so close to the bosses we basically became friends, and the stupid katana still didn't hit. That was an exaggeration, but you get what I'm trying to say. Its unique skill, Once's line of stars, is extremely disappointing. At first glance it seems really good, but once you give it a shot it turns out to be one of the hardest skills to use in the entire game. The main problem is that it's divided into 3 inputs, kind of like Waterfall Dance from Hand of Malenia, but it's way slower and has 0 hyper armor, which means if you get hit, you get kicked out of the animation. And if that wasn't enough, the last part of the skill looks like it has iframes, but the eye might stand as well for invisible, because if anything swings at you, you're getting hit 100%. Honestly, that's a deal breaker for me. It feels really off to disappear from screen but still get hit, especially during such a flashy animation, because when you actually pull off the full skill, it's quite a show. The only reason to use this weapon will be the skill itself if you're really into flash animations and anime-like stuff. If that is not the case, its damage overall is pretty mid compared to other katanas. However, with the next setup you can at least make it reliable. For this build we are gonna use the Starline Sword on +10, any seal we have available to cast our main buffs, and any weapon with the Raptor Optimist Dash of War to easily dodge any difficult attack. I'm gonna be using these 2 items with every build, but I will not mention it every time to avoid being repetitive. We are going to be using the Spell Blade set because it will increase the damage of our unique skill by a total of 8% if we wear the entire set. But a great alternative is the Rakshasa's Armor set. This one increases your overall damage by a total of 8% wearing the entire set. If you want to increase the damage of the next builds I'm gonna show you, you can use this armor set, but I will not be mentioning it every time to save a little bit of time. The most effective talismans for this build are the Shard of Alexander, the Magic Scorpion Charm, the Millicent's Prosthesis, and the Roaring Windsor Insignia. And whenever you need your buffs to last longer, you can use the All Lord's Talisman. I'm also very aware that the skill of this weapon is incredibly hard to use effectively, but if you pay attention to the damage you can deal with the basic moveset of the katana, you can completely ignore the skill and replace the Shard of Alexander with the Two-Handed Sword Talisman. But these are decisions that you have to make according to your playstyle. In our Flask of Wondrous Physique, we are gonna get the best results if we use the Blood-Sucking Crack tier and the Magic Shrouding Crack tier. But the Stonebarb Crack tier is a great alternative if you don't want to use any of these. This one will make easier to break the stance of your targets, opening windows to use the skill. In some fights you can also use the Thorny Crack tier, but you will need to attack very aggressively to get the most out of it. Otherwise I recommend you to stick to the Magic Shrouding Crack tier or the Stonebarb Crack tier. This weapon consumes a decent amount of stamina, so be sure to craft some pickled turtlenecks to boost your stamina regeneration speed. To get the most out of this weapon and to have an optimal build, we are going to use 50 on Vigor, 20 on Mind, 35 on Endurance, 10 on Strength, 80 on Dexterity, 42 on Intelligence, and 33 on Faith. Golden Vow and Hall of Shabriri are going to be our main buffs. If you want to deal additional magic damage, you can use Terra Magica, but this build is already a little complicated to use, so I will not be using that buff. As you can see, I have my Scarletry Blessing on the level 20. You need to have it on the level 20 as well. This is not optional, otherwise your damage is not gonna be the same as mine. This will be the same for every single build, so I will not be repeating it over and over and over. Now I'll show you how to use this build. If there is any significant change to this process for the rest of the builds, I will be sure to explain it, so don't worry. First we are gonna use our Flask of Wondrous Physique, then we are going to cast Golden Vow, and immediately after that, completely optional, we can use a Pickled Turtleneck. Then we are going to use our body buff. In this case it's Howl of Shabriri because we are dealing magic and physical damage, but we can also use Blood Boil Aromatic when dealing only physical damage. Refill your FP, your HP, and with that you should be ready to go. Let's take a look at number 9, where we have the Meteoric Ore Blade. This katana would have easily made it into the top 3 if it wasn't for its ridiculously boring unique skill. I don't know why, but for me, Gravitas and these pulling-like abilities are really overrated. A lot of players defend them because you can pull a bunch of enemies thanks to their huge range, but yeah, that's pretty much all you can do since the damage is so miserable that in boss fights it's not even useful. But hey, if you have a good reason to like these abilities, please let me know in the comment section. The Meteoric Ore Blade, however, features the iconic Ichimonji weapon art from Sekiro as the heavy attacks of its base moveset, which means we can use this movement as many times as we want without needing FP to perform it. In addition, charging this attack deals the same stance damage as all other katanas but significantly faster. This weapon is almost as short as the Starline sword, but the animation of the downward slash makes it super easy to use. So instead of building this blade around its unique skill, it's a lot better to do it with the idea of using the heavy attacks as your main source of damage. Surprisingly, using the weapon this way can boost its performance dramatically, making it a very useful and enjoyable katana. And as a gravity type weapon, it will deal 20% more damage to gravity type enemies like Uchigatana or Astel. Everything sounds pretty cool until you notice the scale values of this weapon. C on both strength and intelligence has to be one of the worst ways to say we don't want this katana to be strong. But as you know, with a few tricks of optimization, it's definitely possible to get an amazing performance out of this blade. We are going to use the Meteoric Ore Blade on +10 and the Staff of the Great Beyond. It doesn't need to be upgraded. We just needed to cast our main buffs. In this case, I'm gonna be rocking the Rakshasa's armor set because I feel it looks amazing with this build and it increases our damage by a total of 8% if we wear the entire set. The best talismans we can use for this build are the Two-Handed Sword Talisman, the Axe Talisman, the Dagger Talisman, and the Magic Scorpion Charm. However, in some scenarios, specifically in boss fights that are not quite short but not too long neither, the Blade of Mercy is very useful as well, because after a critical hit it will increase your damage by 20%. And you can also use the All Lord's Talisman for those fights that are extremely long, such as Consort Radahn or Veil, but you can't go wrong with any combination you make with these talismans. In our Flask of Wondrous Physic, we are going to use the Blood-Sucking Crack Tier and the Spike Crack Tier, but the Stonebarb Crack Tier is a great alternative if you don't want to use any of these, and it will allow you to break the stance of your targets a lot faster. As we are going to be using mostly heavy attacks, this build is going to devour stamina, so be sure to craft some pickled turtlenecks to boost your stamina regeneration speed. To get the max performance of this weapon and to have an optimal build, we are going to use 50 on Vigor, 14 on Mind, 40 on Endurance, 56 on Strength, 27 on Dexterity, 50 on Intelligence, and 33 on Faith. Golden Vow, Hall of Shabriri, and Terra Magica are going to be our main buffs. If you want and if you find the situation optimal, you can cast Terra Magica, but I don't find it necessary. When it comes to underrated weapons, the Dragonscale Blade has to be the katana that deserves more love and recognition. This is one of the only 3 sources of Ice Lightning damage in the entire game, the other 2 being the Dragon Halberd and Frozen Lightning Spear. Ice Lightning is basically lightning damage with Frostbite build up. One would think that something being that simple should be common in the game, but it's actually quite unique. I really like how this effect looks cause you know, blue lightning rocks, but I was really impressed by the high performance this weapon has. For some reason our stupid friends in From Software decided that this weapon must not have the passive bleed build up the other katanas have. I don't know why, but to me it doesn't make sense. Anyways, this weapon scales primarily with dexterity and slightly with strength. In general, it's a really simple katana, but thanks to its unique skill Ice Lightning Sword, it gets vastly stronger. This ability is basically the lightning slash Ash of War but with ice lightning, and it's exactly for that reason that people tend to sleep on this weapon. But the real deal with this ability is not the damage it does, but the amazing buff it applies to the weapon. It adds 160 flat lightning damage to the weapon AR and 80 frost build up for 45 seconds. This means you can proc Frostbite extremely fast in most enemies while dealing additional lightning damage that can be buffed with the Lightning Scorpion Charm and the Lightning Shrouding Crack Tier. Not to mention, this weapon deals 20% more damage to dragon type enemies and 10% more damage to ancient dragons. As I see the things, this weapon is really good. Of course it's not the best katana, but it's way better than many weapons players believe are broken. If you use this weapon with the following settings, you are gonna love it. With this one we are going to use the Dragonscale Blade on +10 with the Thioler's armor set and the Circlet of Light, just because I like how it looks with this build, but remember that you can use the Rakshasa's armor set if you want to deal more damage. The most effective talismans we can use for this build are the Lightning Scorpion Charm, the Two-Handed Sword Talisman, and the Roaring Windsor Insignia. If you are gonna go fast with the R2 attacks, then you can use the Millicent's Prosthesis. If you want to get the most out of the skill, you can use the Shard of Alexander, but I'd rather use the skill as a weapon buff instead of using it as a source of damage. And in longer fights where you can rely on critical hits, you can use the Dagger Talisman or the Blade of Mercy. You can't go wrong with any of these talismans. Anyways, this is the best combo for me. In our Flask of Wondrous Physic, we are going to use the Blood-Sucking Crack Tier and the Thorny Crack Tier, but you can also use the Lightning Shrouding Crack Tier. It's a great alternative for any of these tiers. As we are going to be attacking very fast, I recommend you to craft some pickled turtlenecks to boost your stamina regeneration speed. The most optimal stats for this build are 50 on Vigor, 19 on Mind, 40 on Endurance and Strength, 80 on Dexterity, and 33 on Faith. Golden Vow and Hall of Shabriri are going to be our main buffs. As you can see, I have my Scattering Blessing on the level 20. If you don't level up your blessing, your damage is not gonna be good in the DLC, even if you use more buffs. The buff routine for this one is gonna be the same, but at the end we can use the skill of the weapon to coat the blade on Ice Lightning. This way we will start the fight with this cool effect and dealing more damage. Now we go with the Rivers of Poise, so no, I mean the Serpent Bone Blade. Featuring the double slash Ash of War as its unique skill, I was about to throw this blade to the last spot until I started to play with it. The damage this weapon can deal is crazy. I really didn't expect it to be that good, as it mainly scales of dexterity and only deals physical damage. But how this katana can be so broken if it doesn't even have the passive bleed build-up the other katanas have? Well, that's something I'm still figuring out today. The Serpent Blade has two main features that make it significantly stronger than other weapons of this class. The first one is the fast poison build-up it has with the double slash ability, despite being relatively low if we compare it with the resistances of most enemies in the game. In addition, in Elden Ring we have a total of 3 items to increase our damage with each poison proc: the Mushroom Crown, the Poison Hand, and the Kindred of Rod's Exaltation. All of them can be used in the same build, stacking their benefits for a massive damage boost. The second is its more than decent base AR. That in a katana might be completely destructive if it's combined with the multi-hit talismans. In addition, this blade features a unique double slash R2 attack that, for some reason I do not understand, was buffed in the patch 1.14. This R2 attack is now significantly faster, making the Serpent Blade's DPS really stupid on its on-charge heavy attacks. Anyways, none of this will work if you don't follow the next setup. For this one we are going to use the Serpent Blade on plus 25 and the Poisoned Hand. This item will increase our damage by 7.5% with each poison proc. As you can see, we don't need to meet the requirements to use this weapon. We are going to use it only to stack its passive effect. I'm gonna be rocking the braided cord set with the Preceptor's Trussers and the Mushroom Crown. This helmet will increase our damage by 10% with each poison proc, and it'll stack with the Poisoned Hand. The best talismans we can use for this build are the Shard of Alexander, the Kindred of Rod's Exaltation, the Millicent's Prosthesis, and the Roaring Windsor Insignia. In our Flask of Wondrous Physic we are going to use the Blood-Sucking Cracked Tear and the Thorny Cracked Tear. With this build we are gonna be dealing only physical damage, that's why our best body buff is going to be Blood Boil Aromatic, but if you don't like crafting, feel free to use Flame Grant Me Strength. For some reason double slash devours stamina, so be sure to craft some pickled turtlenecks to boost your stamina regeneration speed. If you want to start the fights with the poison buffs active, you can use some fetid pots. I will be using the rope version cause I feel it's easier to use. By using these items you will proc poison on yourself, so if you really want to do this, be sure to craft some neutralizing boluses to cure the poison. Otherwise you will stack the poison effect with the Blood-Sucking Cracked Tear and you will drain your HP like crazy. If you really want to proc poison on yourself but you are not into crafting, you can use the Deadly Poison Perfume Bottle. In the same way than with the Poisoned Hand, we don't need to meet the requirements to use this weapon. Remember that this is completely optional. The weapon is very good by itself and it will proc poison very frequently. This build is not gonna work unless we use 60 on Vigor, 25 on Mind, 40 on Endurance, 17 on Strength, 95 on Dexterity, and 25 on Faith. Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength are going to be our main buffs. For this one the buff routine will be the same, but if you want you can use some rope fetid pots to proc poison on yourself, or you can also use the Deadly Poison Perfume Bottle. With any of these items you'll be able to do that. Just remember to cure the poison with some neutralizing boluses. And with that you should be ready to go. I believe the Sword of Night is one of the most fun and badass weapons of the entire game. It is extremely easy to use, has a decent range, probably the craziest design of all the katanas, and it actually deals very good damage. However, this weapon only scales of dexterity while also dealing physical and magic damage, which impacts on its overall performance since not a lot of enemies are weak to magic damage. And it also makes it a little harder to build, cause you have to think if the magic part of the weapon is worth to be considered for buffs or just as flat additional damage. I don't think that the fact this weapon deals magic damage is bad, but it will be really good to increase it through stat investment to get the most out of the magic Scorpion Charm or the magic tier. Its unique skill, which in our slash is a triple hit attack that can be charged and is affected by the multi-hit talismans and the Godfrey icon. However, its damage in my opinion is not as good as it could be, especially because it takes a lot of time to be charged. You can perform the skill without charging it, but the animation and the damage will not be the same. Even so, I think this ability is quite useful because once it's charged completely, the execution is really fast. So if you have a decent awareness of your target's moveset, you can use the skill effectively and get some real damage. A good strategy is getting some stages of the multi-hit buffs and then using the skill. This way its damage is gonna be way better. And as the Sword of Night shares the unique double slash R2 attack of the Serpent Blade, that strategy can be really effective. In addition, this weapon has an anti-block feature. The light attacks ignore 50% damage negation from blocks, the heavy and charged attacks ignore even more, and the skill is unblockable. It is the only katana to possess this trait. Sadly for PvE, I find this feature almost useless. Now we are going to use the Sword of Night on plus 10 and the Knight Armor set because I think it looks amazing with this build. The most effective talismans for this one are the Shard of Alexander, the Godfrey icon, the Millicent's Prosthesis, and the Roaring Windsor Insignia. If you are missing one of these talismans, you can also use the magic Scorpion Charm. In our Flask of Wondrous Physic, we are going to use the Blood-Sucking Cracked Tear and the Thorny Cracked Tear, but a great alternative is the magic Shrouding Cracked Tear. This build consumes a decent amount of stamina, so if you wish you can craft some pickled turtlenecks to boost your stamina regeneration speed. The most optimal stats for this build are 60 on Vigor, 22 on Mind, 35 on Endurance, 12 on Strength, 99 on Dexterity, and 33 on Faith. Golden Vow and Hall of Shabriri are going to be our main buffs. The buff routine for this one will remain the same. It's time to talk about the Moonveil, one of the most legendary katanas of this game. Everyone knows this amazing blade and how strong it used to be in the early days of Elden Ring. The only reason why the Moonveil is inside the top 5 here is the Relana's cameo talisman. It was buffed in the patch 1.14, reducing the delay before the damage buff is activated, and this damage buff was increased from 15% to 45%. Since this patch, the stance abilities jumped from being mediocre abilities to be completely broken skills. The Moonveil as a katana was already an amazing weapon, but using the talisman was not worth it since the delay was about 2 seconds long, punishing the DPS. However, as soon as this talisman was enhanced, the Moonveil was back at dealing massive damage with its unique skill Transient Moonlight, a magic variation of the Unsheathed Ash of War which was also affected by this talisman and that we will address in a few minutes. The cool part of this ability on the Moonveil is that it shoots a magic projectile that travels far enough to hit targets out of melee range. Something I love about the Moonveil is how well optimized are its scale values, allowing the player to evenly split the damage of the blade between magic and physical. This is really good when the damage is strong enough to compensate the defense of some bosses, unlike the Sword of Night or the Starline Sword where the magic damage is not really good. In a summary, the Moonveil remains as one of the best katanas you can choose if you are looking for a fun weapon with consistent damage and aggressive gameplay. If you want to see this weapon like in the good old days, be sure to run your character this way. We are going to use the Moonveil on +10 and the Staff of the Great Beyond. It doesn't need to be upgraded because we are going to use it only to cast our main buffs. I'm using this staff specifically because it's perfect to cast sorceries and incantations at the same time. We are going to be rocking the Spellblade set because it will increase the damage of Transient Moonlight by a total of 10% if we wear the entire set. The most effective talismans for this build are the Shard of Alexander, the Relana's Cameo, the Magic Scorpion Charm, and the Millicent's Prosthesis. But in longer fights or against tougher enemies, I recommend you to use the All Lord's Talisman. This one will increase the duration of our buffs. In our Flask of Wondrous Physic, we are going to use the Blood-Sucking Crack tier and the Magic Shrouding Crack tier. Both feel free to use any other tier you find useful. This build consumes a decent amount of stamina, so be sure to craft some pickled turtlenecks to boost your stamina regeneration speed. But in this case, it's a little bit more optional. In order to obtain the max performance of this weapon and to have an optimal build, we are going to use 50 on Vigor, 20 on Mind, 35 on Endurance, 12 on Strength, 60 on Dexterity and Intelligence, and 33 on Faith. Golden Vow, Hall of Shabriri, and Terra Magica are going to be our main buffs. The buff routine for this one will be the same, but if you want you can use Terra Magica before attacking your target to increase your magic damage. Have you ever noticed that we don't have a fate scaling unique katana? Well, don't worry because we will use the Uchigatana to fulfill such important duty. As an infusible weapon, you can do with this blade whatever you want, basically, but that might also affect how good or bad it will be depending on your build. In this case, I'd like to pretend this weapon was designed to be used this way since it feels pretty unique in my opinion. Previously, we talked about the Moonveil and how Transient Moonlight is the magic version of the Unsheathed Ash of War, but what if we have a flame or sacred version of this ability? As you know, holy damage has always been seen as the weakest elemental damage, because it's very hard to use against the last bosses of the base game. Even so, in the DLC it's incredibly useful. I know for a fact that using holy damage is a great idea to defeat Consort Radan. If you pay attention to the flame art and sacred affinities, both scale with faith, which means that if we crank up faith to 99, we will have an Uchigatana capable of dealing massive holy or fire damage. With a simple tweak on the affinities, you can change the type of damage you want to deal without touching the stats. And if you combine that with the Relana's Cameo for the Unsheathed Ash of War, you got in your hands the best Fate Katana of the entire game. As a side note, you can do this with the Nagakiba if you wish, but that one has a more important role way later in this video. For this one, we are gonna use the Uchigatana on +25 with the Unsheathed Ash of War on the Flame Art or Sacred Affinity, depending of the boss fight we are going to face. I'm gonna be rocking the Gold Mask's racks, the Queen's Bracelets, the Old Sorcerer's Leg Wraps, and the Commoner's Headband on its altered version, merely for aesthetical reasons. The best talismans we can use for this build are the Shard of Alexander, the Relana's Cameo, the Fire Scorpion Charm, and the Old Lord's Talisman. If we are gonna use the sacred version of the Uchigatana, then we will use the Sacred Scorpion Charm. And in some boss fights where you can defeat enemies, in this case Renala, Radagon, you can get a significant 15% damage boost if you use the Crusade Insignia. In our Flask of Wondrous Physic, we are gonna use the Blood-Sucking Crack tier and the Flame Shrouding Crack tier. If we are going to be dealing holy damage, then we will use the Holy Shrouding Crack tier. If you want to increase your fire damage significantly, you can also use the Hefty Oil Pots or the regular Oil Pots. These items increase the next fire damage instance by 65% and 50%. In order to obtain the max performance of this weapon and to have an optimal build, we are going to use 60 on Vigor, 21 on Mind, 40 on Endurance, 12 on Strength, 30 on Dexterity, and 99 on Faith. Golden Vow and Hall of Shabriri are going to be our main main buffs. If you want, you can also use the blessing of the Erdtree to counter the HP drain effect of the blood-sucking cracked tier. And with this one the buff routine will be pretty much the same, but if you want to deal more fire damage, you can hit your target with a hefty oil pot or a regular oil pot before using your weapon. This way your damage is gonna be significantly higher. As the number 3 we have the Hand of Malenia. I understand that this blade is not the easiest one to use, but it's definitely one of the most broken katanas you can use to destroy the game quickly. The Hand of Malenia, besides of having the full Waterfall Dance as its unique skill, is also the second longest katana of the game, being only outranged by the Nagakiba. It's a pure physical damage weapon with a solid V scaling on dexterity, and of course a passive bleed build-up that in this case is an extremely effective feature, even more than it already is for other katanas. The Waterfall Dance, as you know, is a destructive attack. If you use it in the right moment and you manage to pull off the entire skill, the damage you can do is absurd. Combining this ability with the multi-hit talismans and the thorny tier, you can skyrocket your damage, melting bosses that are not even vulnerable to slash damage or bleed. Speaking about bleed, I don't know how many hits exactly you deal with the Waterfall Dance, but it's a guarantee that you will get at least one bleed proc, which is crazy since this katana is not built around arcane or bleed infusion. It's a dexterity weapon with really high DPS that without the bleed will work more than just fine. But thanks to this feature, it's a boss melting machine. On top of that, if you really want to get dirty with the damage, you can use this weapon while wearing the Dancer's armor set that raises the damage of the Waterfall Dance by 10%. Like that thing wasn't broken enough already. The reason why I think this katana is in the right place in this list is the fact that it's a high risk weapon with a truly high reward as well. It might not be a blade for everyone, but I wouldn't put this weapon any lower. It's a monster, it requires a bit of practice, but is disgustingly broken. If you want to replicate the damage of the clips, be sure to use my settings. With this one we are going to use the Hand of Malenia on +10, and if you want to start the fights with the bleed buffs active, you can use any weapon with seppuku, but it is completely optional. I'm gonna be rocking the Malenia's armor set cause it will be a sin to not use this one with this build. But if you want to deal more damage, you can use the Dancer's armor set that will increase the damage of the Waterfall Dance by a total of 10% if we wear the entire set. Even so, I will stick to the Malenia's armor set cause the build is already pretty strong and I really like my character to look like Malenia. The best talismans we can use for this build are the Shard of Alexander, the Lord of Blood's Exultation, the Millicent's Prosthesis, and the Roaring Windsor Insignia. In our Flask of Wondrous Physic we are going to use the Blood-Sucking Crack tier and the Thorny Crack tier. With this build we are gonna be dealing only physical damage, that's why our best body buff is going to be Blood Boil Aromatic, but if you don't like crafting, feel free to use Flame Grant Me Strength. If you want to perform the Waterfall Dance entirely, you will need a lot of stamina, so be sure to craft some pickled turtlenecks to boost your stamina regeneration speed. This build is not gonna be broken unless we use 50 on Vigor, 26 on Mind, 40 on Endurance, 16 on Strength, 99 on Dexterity, 25 on Faith, and 16 on Arcane. Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength are going to be our main buffs. If you want to proc bleed faster, you can use the Swarm of Flies. It is actually very useful with this build because we are only relying on the passive bleed build-up of the weapon, so it's great to have additional bleed build-up. With this build, the buff routine will remain the same, but if you want to start the fights with the bleed buffs active, you can use Seppuku. Just after that, refill your FP, your HP, and with that you should be ready to go. Plenty of you guys asked me if the Rivers of Blood is better than the Nagakiba, and as here we are already speaking about the Rivers of Blood, let me explain why despite it is my favorite weapon, I believe it's not better than the Nagakiba. Look, the Rivers of Blood is an amazing weapon, and now it's even better than before thanks to the Ansbach set that makes Corpse Piler even stronger, but it's a very limited weapon. As a katana, its damage is split between physical and fire damage, scaling mainly from dexterity and arcane. You might think that by upgrading arcane, its bleed build-up might grow significantly, but it caps at 70. Unlike most bleed-infused weapons that at 50 arcane will give you around 110 bleed build-up. Its range is also not remarkable from other katanas. It has exactly the same range of the Moonveil or the Serpent Bone Blade, and it's a unique weapon, which means you are tied to its properties. You can change the Ash of War or the affinity to compensate its flaws, something you can actually do with the Nagakiba. And about the skill, in terms of damage, will be the only reason why this weapon is here. Its amazing design helps a little bit, but the damage of the skill is what makes me put this weapon here. In some scenarios, like against the Divine Beast Dancing Lion, it outdamages the Nagakiba. When using the skill, it has basically the same range thanks to the projectile part of the Corpse Piler, and against enemies weak to fire, it literally melts the bosses. It is indeed not a bad weapon, and I do not consider it to be overrated. For a reason, I place it here in the second place, but I need to explain why, even if I'd like to see it in the first place, it deserves the silver medal. With that being said, this weapon is an absolute monster, faster, and as long as you check the following setup, you are gonna destroy the game with it. We are going to use the Rivers of Blood on +10, and we are going to use any weapon with the Seppuku Ash of War to start the fights with the bleed buffs active, but this one is completely optional. I'm going to be using the entire Ansbach set cause it will increase the damage of the Corpse Piler by a total of 15%. The best talismans we can use are the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, the Shard of Alexander, the Millicent's Prosthesis, and the Roaring Windsor Insignia. In our Flask of Wondrous Physic, we are going to use the Blood-Sucking Cracked Tear and the Thorny Cracked Tear. In most cases, we are going to buff our character with Howl of Shabriri, but there are a few enemies that are extremely resistant to fire damage. For that situations, Blood Boil Aromatic is a great alternative, but in most scenarios you won't need this item. For some reason, this weapon devours stamina, so be sure to craft some pickled turtlenecks to boost your stamina regeneration speed. To get the most out of our weapon and to have an optimal build, we are going to use 50 on Vigor, 20 on Mind, 40 on Endurance, 12 on Strength, 60 on Dexterity, 33 on Faith, and 57 on Arcane. Golden Vow and Howl of Shabriri are going to be our main buffs, but you can also use Flame grant me Strength if you don't want to take additional damage. And if you want to proc bleed faster, you can use the Swarm of Flies. With the high level of Arcane we have, this spell is gonna be extremely useful. The buff routine for this one will remain the same. The Nagakiba, as a fun fact, is slightly weaker than the Uchigatana by exactly 1 point in most infusions. Nonetheless, its insane range makes it the undisputed king. This one has all the flaws of the Rivers of Blood covered. It's infusible, which increases its versatility and overall effectiveness dramatically. It has a unique piercing art to attack, which makes its already stupid range even more ridiculous. That it can reach targets like it was a great katana. In bleed affinity with double slash, it outdamaged the Rivers of Blood in most scenarios, with more frequent bleed procs and basically the same range. Moreover, this weapon can be used on the keen affinity and buff with incantations to deal even more damage. Using this weapon with double slash and Blood Flame Blade makes the bosses in New Game +7 a complete joke. This happens because Blood Flame Blade is not affected by motion values, which means every 2 seconds we will stack 40 bleed build-up per hit, plus the passive bleed build-up that the weapon already deals. If for some reason you still believe the Rivers of Blood is better, in the gameplay clips I am not using the Rakshasa set and the White Mask, which will increase the damage of the Nagakiba by a total of 16%. So give it a shot with the next build and let me know how it went for you. We are going to use the Nagakiba on +25 with the double slash Ash of War and the Finger Seal on +25 to get the max fire damage possible out of Blood Flame Blade and Black Flame Blade incantations. If you want to start the fights with the bleed buffs active, you can use any weapon with Seppuku. However, it is completely optional. I'm gonna be rocking the White Reed armor set with the Iron Casa just because I like how it looks with this build, but feel free to use any other armor set you find useful. The best talismans we can use for this build are the Shard of Alexander, the Millicent's Prosthesis, the Roaring Windsor Insignia, and the Lord of Blood's Exaltation. If you are missing one of these talismans, you can also use the Fire Scorpion Charm. This is also a great alternative when facing enemies that are immune to bleed. In our Flask of Wondrous Physic, we are gonna get the best results if we use the Blood-Sucking Cracked Tear and the Thorny Cracked Tear. For some reason, double slash devours stamina, so be sure to craft some pickled turtlenecks to boost your stamina regeneration speed. With this build, we are not gonna be dealing only physical damage, but the main part of our damage is gonna be physical, so the best body buff we can use is Blood Boil Aromatic. But if you don't like crafting, you can also use Flame grant me Strength. To get the most out of this weapon and to have an optimal build, we are going to use 50 on Vigor, 24 on Mind, 45 on Endurance, 18 on Strength, 94 on Dexterity, 25 on Faith, and 16 on Arcane. Golden Vow, Blood Flame Blade, Black Flame Blade, and Flame grant me Strength are going to be our main buffs. If you want to proc bleed faster, you can also use the Swarm of Flies, but I will only use it in very specific fights, so it's really not necessary. With this one, the buff routine will be the same, but at the end we are going to cast Blood Flame Blade or Black Flame Blade depending on which one you want to use. With that, you should be ready to go. Let me know in the comment section what do you think of these builds. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to my channel for more Elden Ring videos. Have a great day guys, my name's Carlos and I'll see you in the next one.